I'm Jason, and this is your introduction to Matthew. The author of this book, we believe, is Matthew, the tax collector who turned disciple of Jesus. We believe this for several reasons. The earliest writers actually credit the Gospel of Matthew to Matthew the tax collector, and this goes as far back as 100 AD. Matthew also fits as the author. He followed Jesus. The author had an interest in numbers and figures throughout the entire book, which would make excellent sense if it were a tax collector, someone who just lived with numbers and statistics. This book was probably written between 50 and 70 AD. We think this because the book ends with the ascension of Jesus, so it had to be after 30 AD. And yet there's prophecies about what's going to happen to Jerusalem. The fall of Jerusalem didn't occur until 70 AD. So the book was probably written in between that period of time when Jesus ascended into heaven, but before the fall of Jerusalem. His original audience was the Jewish people that he wanted to inform them that the Messiah had come. There's a lot of emphasis about the Messiah fulfilling the Old Testament prophecies. So Matthew constantly goes back to the Old Testament as well. The whole purpose is to show Jesus as Messiah, Savior, and King, as prophesied by the Hebrew prophets. 16 times Matthew says, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord said through the prophet. There's also 93 Old Testament references. The main characteristics of this book. One of them is that Matthew is one of the Gospels. It describes the life and ministry of Jesus. There's only 4 Gospels. There's only 4 books that do that. Another characteristic is that it's heavily kingdom-focused. It presents Jesus as king and heaven as a kingdom. It is also eschatological. It describes the Lord's return. In Matthew, we have one of the best depictions of the return of Jesus found anywhere in the New Testament. It is also ecclesiastical, and that means that it describes the church. A lot of the books actually don't even mention the church, and yet because it's so kingdom-oriented, kingdom-focused, that Matthew wanted to present the church as part of the kingdom, so he describes the church itself, or the assembly of God's people. The book of Matthew has 28 chapters in it, and it's broken down into 4 sections. Chapters 1 and 2 talk about the birth and the childhood of the Messiah. Chapters 3 through 20 talk about the ministry of Jesus. That includes both his teachings as well as his works. Chapters 21 through 27 talk about the last days of Jesus, including his death. And the last chapter, chapter 28, talks about his resurrection. So that's a general outline of the book of Matthew. And these are all good things to know going into the commentary of Matthew, because they're going to help us better understand why Matthew wrote about the things he wrote. Well, that's it for the introduction to Matthew. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you guys next time.